Uh, it's a pleasure for me to be here with you in this network of PhD students in the Armena project. And yeah, I was happy to answer the call of Dr. Yad to participate and to be here with you. Well, I have a big presentation, but I will make it quick, and I will try to probably just give you a glimpse of what is going on in Colombia, what happened there, and what is the situation now in terms of reconciliation at the end. But I guess it will be very brief. So if you want to go deeper in some parts or in any details, just ask me during the chat, or even you have my email probably, or we can share it later, and you can make me questions through the email too if you have anything to that you want to know after the talk. So let me yeah, I need that you allow me to share my screen.
Yeah, it's done. Okay.
Great. Can you see anything?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, fine.
Yes.
Great. So yeah, the introduction to Colombia is going to be following the topics, the areas of study of peace research. Peace research is focusing conflict, violence, and peace, and my talk is going to navigate between those issues in the case of Colombia, and at the end I will also mention some conditions and the situation of the reconciliation process in Colombia nowadays. So yeah, first you need to know where is Colombia. I guess you have some knowledge about it. If I ask you about Colombia, what do you know about Colombia? Any of you? Do you know anything about Colombia? It's a question for you. What do you know about
I did know
Colombia?
that you were, I think it's well known that you're in South America, and that there has been a long-term challenge in terms of drug cartels and sort of internal disputes that center around drugs and violence.
And do you know someone from Colombia?
I had one research assistant when I was doing my master's degree at Columbia University who was Colombian.
Yeah, but he's not famous. Some
No.
famous people from Colombia? You know any names? Football, soccers, rock stars. You know Shakira.
No one comes. Oh, that's right. Yes, of course. Well, she's half Lebanese, so we count her as Lebanese.
Yes, half Lebanese, half Colombian, yes. And yeah, probably you know some football, soccers, you know Pablo Escolar due to Netflix and these things. So yeah, Colombia, it's a place that we know some things about this place as a place for a conflict, a place for drugs, and it became popular in those spheres. It happens something that happens also for or to Palestinians too, and is that Colombians, when they cross borders, they have extra problems when they have to move from one country to the other, because they always receive extra checking in the borders, in the checkpoints, because they are always suspicious about something. So this history of conflict, violence, and drugs, it's accompanying Colombians during their trips and their lives and the place where they arrive. So yeah, there is no Islamophobia against them, but there is kind of Orientalism also, a lot of prejudice against Colombian people. And Colombia, as you said before, is a country in South America. You can see it here. It's in the north of South America, near the Panama Canal. And it's a You can see it here, Colombia. It is not one of the biggest countries of South America, but still, it is a big country. It is divided in the 30-something departments, administrative departments. The capital is here, is Bogota, is the center, and it has some other economic hubs like Medellin here, or harboring areas like this one. Shakira was raised here, and here too. It has border with Venezuela, Brazil, Peru, Ecuador, and Panama here. And it has access to the Caribbean and the Atlantic Ocean, but also to the Pacific Ocean. So strategically, is the door to South America, coming from Central and North America. And it is a big country. It's, the size of the country is almost double than Spain. It's a little bit bigger than France. So it's a big country. And it has different landscapes and environments. There are three chains of mountains here. 3 chains of mountains. They are part of the Andean mountains. They have forest here. They have long or wide areas for farming, and plain areas for farming, and they have big rivers in between every 2 chains of mountains. There is very long and full of water rivers. So it's a very complex geography with big mountains, forests, big rivers, and the situation, the location between the 2 oceans. So strategically, it's a relevant hub, and very big territory, not easy to control by the state. Colombia has almost 50 million people. Comparing with historical Palestine, is like 5 times bigger in terms of population, much more in terms of size. And but the density of population is very, very low in comparison with European countries, or in comparison with other places. It is a very empty country. So it has 50 million people, but most of the country is quite empty. It is an upper middle income level country. So yeah, most or it should not have big pockets of poverty according to the income level, the average. The problem is that there is a big significant inequality in the country. So this makes that there are few people who have, or who are quite wealthy, and many people who are under the line of poverty. The ethnic composition of the country is mostly white or mestizo, and but still there are big communities of Afro-Colombian population, and also indigenous populations. They are just around 50% of the population, but the significant thing is that they are or they occupy big areas of the territory, sparsely populated, but big areas of the territory. And the official language is Spanish, because Spain was the colonial power in this area, but there are also almost 70 languages recognized in the country. So the diversity of the country, it was quite huge. And thanks to the Spaniards, also religion is mostly Christian in the country, and mostly Catholic. It is a state which is a democracy, a republic since the beginning of the 19th century. You can see here a picture of the current president of the country, Duque, and they have, like the states, a presidential political system. The constitution dates from 1991, and yeah, it established a parliamentary liberal democracy. But being a democracy is not easy, and Colombia, it usually ranks, or it is usually in the lower ranks of the democratic index internationally. So if we take, for instance, the economies, it says that Colombia has a poor performance in terms of democracy compared with Spain, the United States, not bad compared with Argentina, and according to the Economist, also performs much worse than Israel, for instance. In international relations, due to the nature of the elites in power in the country since the beginning of the 20th century and even during the 19th century, the political elites are quite conservative, and they have good relations with the United States and also with regional conservative governments, also nowadays. And it had traditionally bad relations with more progressive governments, leftist governments in the regions like Cuba, Venezuela, or Ecuador, or Bolivia in other times. So yeah, these are basic data from Colombia. It usually claims that, I mean, Colombians or politicians in Colombia, that it is the longest democratic state in South America. And it is true, because it's a liberal democracy since the independence in 1819. But, and it is true that they don't have military intervention in politics like other Latin American countries. But yeah, it is difficult to consider Colombia like a proper democracy when there are big pockets of the population excluded of the system, like indigenous people, Afro-Colombians, or even people who are more supportive of progressive or leftist ideas. So there are too many people out of the political system to consider like a real democracy. It is true that there are elections time to time. It is true that there are a couple of parties or political groups who are just turning in power, more or less. But yeah, many other people are excluded of the system, and this originated the violence, the ongoing violence since the 60s till nowadays in Colombia. Lot of grievance, lot of people unhappy with the political system, lot of people who are not allowed to participate in the political system, and they look for different ways to change the political system out of the system. So they try to make the revolution in the 60s, in the 70s. They try to change the political regime through the arms, through the war. And this initiated these grievances and these processes initiated the war in Colombia, and are the base of many of the conflicts happening still nowadays in Colombia. So Colombia is a country where there are happening many conflicts at the same time, with many actors, and one conflict influencing the others, all the actors participating in different conflicts, and it's a very difficult mess. It's very difficult to analyze conflicts in Colombia because of the long time where these conflicts are developing. They are protracted conflicts since the end of the 50s, and yeah, these conflicts involved in some cases the government, I mean the state, the government in power, with different guerrilla groups or political parties that decided to use the force and violent means to change the political regime. They are fighting for the government, and they wanted to do the revolution. And the state, in the hands of these conservative political groups, they try to defeat these revolutions, and they try to defeat these guerrillas. There are still some guerrilla groups fighting the government. Part of them are the ILN, the National Liberation Army. Here, this is an active guerrilla group fighting the government. And there are some dissidents of the former FARC, the Colombian Revolutionary Armed Forces. They reached an agreement to demobilize 6 years ago, but some groups didn't accept inside of the FARC, and they are still fighting the government. So these guerrillas are still trying to do the revolution in Colombia. But there are also conflicts not only for the government and the political regime, but also there are conflicts about the territory, control. There are different groups trying to control the territory and disputing the control of the territory to the government. These guerrilla groups fight for territory too, but also paramilitary groups. Why are they fighting for territory? Because they want money. They want to control the territory and the population, and they're living in that territory in order to get taxes from them, in order to implement economic projects there, like the growth of illicit crops, or even to control transport corridors in order to take taxes from the goods crossing those corridors. So it's a conflict also for money, for wealth. We have also big divisions in Colombia between the center and the periphery, not only in terms of geography, but in terms of power. Elites, those who traditionally control the power, are quite, well, they are not happy allowing more to have access to power, economic, political power in Colombia. So this is a big problem there, because, for instance, we can see how power concentrates into the cities, and people living in the cities and people living in the periphery, they don't have. So living in rural areas, living far from the capital, makes everything more difficult for them. And then we have also significant conflicts over different development models. So, we have in Colombia many people who are still living in communities, in rural communities. They are peasants, they are indigenous people, they are Afro-Colombians, and they have traditional ways of living, self-subsistence. They have different ways to have access to the land ownership, and these things. And this clash, their traditional view of living and connecting their livings with the nature, in many cases clash with the neoliberal or the capitalist logic of dealing with nature, with way of living, with how our community is organized. And this is this class is going to create lots of conflicts between the state and these communities in many parts of the countries, usually around extractive projects like mining or industrial crops or other micro projects. Especially because the government is always going to criminalize those who oppose this kind of projects, these economic projects. They are defended by the government because they say that these economic projects are going to create jobs, are going to create economic development. But the communities say, well, these are going to create jobs for now, but economic development for whom? Because probably it's going to destroy our way of living, and we are not going to receive any benefits from this economic projects. they are going to benefit again the elites in Colombia or people living far from their communities. And the government usually use the state's agents and the state's system to criminalize those who oppose these projects. And beyond, or due to, or in all the conflicts that appear in the Colombian landscape, we are going to see also the emergence of violence. Violence is a clear and a central component of many of those conflicts in Colombia. A violence that it has been performing, it has been active in Colombia in a significant way since the 50s, with big armed conflicts developed in the territory. And according to the figures of the National Center for Historical Memory and others, they check and found that more than 250,000 people have been killed in these conflicts. 80% of them were civilians. And we have paramilitary groups, guerrilla groups, and state agents, security forces, committing crimes against civilians and killing people in different ways across the decades, across the territory. And still, it is a situation that is happening now. So direct violence is a constant in the Colombian society. It generated almost 6 million of internally displaced people. Until the emergence of the war in Syria 12 years ago, or 11 years ago, Colombia was the country with, I guess, higher number of internally displaced people or refugees people in the world. And yeah, now with Syria and then with Ukraine, this has changed. But still, the displacement, it has been also a very relevant problem in Colombia, an issue to deal with, and it has generated a lot of problems. And this displaced people, they were just escaping from violence, or they were just expelled from their places by violence. Now imagine the Palestinian Nakba. The Colombians have been suffering also that kind of behavior. In this case, people who use direct violence against them were trying to take their place, take their land in order to implement economic projects for them, in order to control territory for them, paramilitary groups, guerrilla groups, or economics groups. They used violence to displace these people. And we even could see in Colombia a kind of political genocide. There was a party, the Patriotic Union Party, born after a peace agreement between the FARC, one of the guerrillas, and the government. The FARC decided to demobilize the army, the guerrilla, and to try to compete in the political arena for, to have an option to enter into the government, the parliament, and these things. But they were systematically killed, the members of the party, the leaders, and many of the members of the party, until more than 5,000 people were systematically killed. And this made the FARC to continue the war in the 80s. This happened in the 80s, and this forced or motivated the FARC to continue fighting the government in the forests, in the mountains, by violent means during 20 years, 30 years more. And in Colombia, we are going to see this direct violence happening since the 60s, and still nowadays, according to the data, for instance, from International Amnesty, all the reports that they produce every year, we can see how security forces, paramilitary groups, guerrilla groups are committing illegal acts and crimes using direct violence. The security forces use excessive use of force against those who oppose the politics of the government, the policies of the government. Economic policies or political policies are systematically defended by the use of excessive force when they meet challenged by peaceful demonstrators, for instance, like the 1 year ago. Security forces use extrajudicial executions too. This is something also common probably in the Arab world. We could see and still can see many paramilitary groups acting and committing a lot of crimes in Colombia. Guerrilla groups who are active are also committing lots of human rights abuse, also international humanitarian law violations. And yeah, and out of this, we can see, for instance, how the last year, and this is a trend, it's not just 1 year, it's something that's happening in the last 5, 6, 7, 10 years. We can see how human rights defenders, leaders, journalists are attacked, are killed, are murdered due to their defense of human rights of people in Colombia, because they are criminalized. They think that anyone who opposes the government or the state, it is a criminal. So yeah, they just kill people or justify that paramilitary groups kill people. So it's security forces and paramilitary groups here are doing the nasty or the nasty work of the state. Beyond the direct violence, we have also a lot of structural violence happening against the Colombian population. I mentioned already these political structures that exclude most of the Colombian people from the political system. Many people have difficulties to register for elections. The two biggest political parties, the liberal and the conservative parties, those who are turning in power, they monopolize the political spectrum, and they monopolize the mass media, and they have the economic support, enough economic support to reach all the areas in Colombia, while left-wing parties or other new parties are excluded from the political arena because they don't have the same resources, or they are just not allowed to develop normal, regular political campaigns during the elections. So as a result, they have no access to the government. They had no access, and they are still out of the government. And beyond that, there are also political structures who are not equal for everybody, because the state has no presence in all the territory. The state has presence in very populated areas like big cities, but the rural areas, in many cases, they don't have any presence of the state, any public service. They don't have health service, educational service. What they see from the state is just the presence of the security forces, the army, or the police. And this has made very difficult the relation between many communities and the state, because they don't receive anything from the state but violence. There are also economic structures which are very, very violent against most of the Colombian people. They enjoy a free market, which is implementing neoliberal economic policies like in Chile or in other countries. And this is benefiting mostly to elites and oligarchies. And many people are losing against this structure. So there is a great inequality in wealth distribution in Colombia. This is one of the things that struck more to Europeans or Americans when they travel to Colombia. the inequality that they have. It is something beyond our imagination. So it's also explained why a lot of people who doesn't have anything, they are ready to try to take it by force, because they are really having nothing in many cases. So crime is a problem in cities, for instance, in Colombia. And part of these economic structures, violent economic structure and against Colombian people, is the way of land distribution in Colombia, because many people don't have access to land. So we are talking about a country which has been mostly a country of farmers, a country of people who survive cultivating since farming, but in many cases they don't have access to the land. There are some big landowners who have 80% of the land, and this creates a lot of grievance for many people. And this is something that the guerrilla were trying to change, not only the political system, the political structures, but also the economic structures and the distribution and the access to the land. So yeah, we have many structures who provide, or which provides violence for Colombians, and this violence which is distributed through political, economic, finally structures, but also all that direct violence that is happening, and all these armed conflicts happening in Colombia, is usually justified through different reasons. So we have a racism very high in Colombia. There is a justification of violence happening against particular ethnic groups like Afro or indigenous people, because they are considered inferior people. We have also a lot of violence provided by the army and the security forces, because they have received a lot of power from the state. The state during many years, and many of the governments in power, they defended the military in Colombia, and they thought that the only way to solve conflicts in Colombia was by military means. So this made the military and the soldiers, generals, and so on have a lot of privileges in the Colombian society. And there is a culture of considering any people who is opposing political policies from the government as a criminal. They are not considered as opponents, they are considered enemies, and they are labeled as, before they were labeled as communists, now they are labeled as like terrorists. And in this way they are criminalized, and they are target of violence, of direct violence. It doesn't matter if they are political opposition, if they are human rights defenders, social leaders, doesn't matter. They became criminals. And there is a narrative trying to justify violence happening to them. So yeah, there are a lot of violence happening in Colombia, and you know already the cost of violence. I'm not going to go deeper on this, but violence has a lot of costs on society. And so we try to look for ways to deal with violence. And Colombia, like in many other places, have been trying to prevent, to stop, and to end all the violence happening in the country, especially focusing mostly in direct violence, but not only. And here, I guess you already know these strategies, these UN strategies for conflict management, talking about preventing the violence prevention, peacekeeping strategies, peacemaking strategies, or peace building strategies. So I divided the following part of the presentation according to these big areas for conflict management. In Colombia, it has been implemented the strategies from these different areas in order to try to improve the situation and to bring peace into Colombia. And in some cases, it's the state who has been trying to implement, for instance, peacekeeping strategies. And yeah, but in the context of this civil war, peacekeeping involved trying to prevent that further violence happened or continues. So they try to provide peace, security, stability, and order. And they try to do it through public policies, through laws, and the use of security forces. And especially in Colombia, Colombian government has used these security forces in order to win the different conflicts and trying to impose a peace, impose a security and stability and an order. And in many cases, the state used not only security forces, but also use paramilitary groups to go beyond or to do more things that security forces were allowed to do legally. And this meant that security and violence prevention in Colombia, it has been quite militarized. So mostly in the last 60 years in Colombia, we had a lot of attempts to provide security and violence prevention through more war, more violence, and the results were not good. We could see it, for instance, in the war on drugs or war on terror. They were following the same schemes that the US, for instance. And in this case, it is interesting to see how Colombia, it's a close partner of the US, and it was receiving a lot of military aid from the US, just behind Egypt and Israel. So it was the third receptor of military aid from the US. Why? Because Colombia was trying to do war to solve those conflicts, and we can see the results now. They tried to fight guerrilla and paramilitary groups, and they did not win the war. They tried to provide armed protections to people or to individuals, but it didn't go well. And in many cases, it was very interesting how communities, which were going to be protected by security forces, they demanded that the state didn't provide that security. They wanted to be far from the security forces. And if the state didn't allow, they just moved. We have many cases of Colombian communities who moved the town, moved the village from one place to another in order to escape to the presence of the police or army stations. So they didn't trust in the state, they didn't trust in the security forces, because they didn't believe that they were going to solve their problems, their conflicts. And yeah, it's just brought more and more problems to the Colombian political arena. And we can see there are many documentary, many reports and records of war crimes and collusion of interests and work between security forces and paramilitary groups. In Colombia, there was also intervention of the Organization of American States. It's a regional organization in Latin America, well, in the whole America. And they tried to support different peace processes happening in Colombia, especially in 2004, but also in 2016. And they tried to contribute to the reduction of violence in Colombia. With well, until 2016, they didn't have too much effect And in the development and in the implementation of the peace process in 2016, they had more or better results. There were also intervention of the United Nations in Colombia during many years, doing many different things with the development program, or many other refugees, or many other issues, trying to been affected by this intervention of the United Nations through different agencies. And what they were present there too. We can see how the civil society, international and local civil society, they also organize themselves to provide protection to civilians in Colombia, with good results at the local level and with some groups. And yeah, and I mentioned this idea of peace communities, how some communities in Colombia, they just try to protect themselves by other means, but no with weapons, and no with the support of the state, because if the state was part of the war, it was another actor of the violent conflicts happening in Colombia. And many communities, they wanted to stay out of the war and out of those violent conflicts. So they just move, or they just develop different strategies to protect themselves without weapons and without the presence of the state. And yeah, beyond the activities of peacekeeping, we can see also in Colombia how there were many different processes of peacemaking, different processes of bringing enemies together to resolve the conflicts through negotiations between the armed actors and the state. They try to end the armed conflicts in different moments, different governments during the 80s, the 90s, and in the new millennia. They try to initiate different negotiation process with the guerrilla paramilitary groups. So there is a history of this process in Colombia, with not very good results. As I told you, the violence, direct and structural and cultural violence, continue performing in Colombia until nowadays. But it is interesting how in the new millennia, in the last 20 years, it has been developed a process of transitional justice. And this has been a process of learning, proving, testing. And I have to say that it is advancing, and it is a way to keep a door open to offer an exit to the violence and to the conflicts in Colombia. It is a way to try to promote reconciliation in the country too, to create peace and promote reconciliation, that it was very much implemented in the last peace process in Colombia. The last peace process in Colombia is the one led by the former president of the country, Juan Manuel Santos. And he started negotiations between the states, the government, and the main guerrilla in Colombia, the FARC. And they were having negotiations in La Habana. They started the process there, and they ended in Oslo. And they reached a deal to try to manage structural and direct violence, and trying to transform the conflict and provide a solution and options for Colombians with higher levels of peace. They were not only focusing on ending the direct violence with the mobilization of the FARC guerrilla or the reincorporation to the society, but also they try to deal with the structural violence. They try to include they included in the final agreement accords to promote a land reform for agriculture in Colombia. They try to provide a new system or to increase the political participation of the Colombians in the political system. They try to reduce or to deal with the illicit crops problem, the drugs cultivation, and also they try to provide justice to the victims. This was this was very important if Colombian society wanted to move to a stage of reconciliation. And it is true that this agreement, it has initiated a process of reform, a reform of the state, that it has been initiated. It has still in front of it a long process, and it has also some problems because the new government is not very happy with this agreement, and they try to stop it in different ways. But still, we could see how the FARC, they transformed in a political party. The political party was able to present in the last elections, but they didn't receive good results in those elections, but still they could participate. Still, they received some attacks, and some of the leaders and the members of the party were killed, but well, they were surviving, they were performing more or less. The plans and the idea of stopping the production of illicit crops in Colombia, it has failed until now, because yes, the FARC renounced to cultivate this crop, but there are other groups who are doing it, and there are no easy solutions for farmers, because the government wanted to that farmers stop to produce drugs. But the problem is that if the farmers don't produce drugs, what can they produce for survive? They need some incomes to survive, to provide food for their families, and it's sad, but the most benefit crops in the world are these illicit crops. So it is still a problem in Colombia, and they still need to work more on that. It was quite successful, the mobilization of the FARC. They were disarmed, demobilized, and reincorporated into the society, and there were 6,000 soldiers who initiated a new life in the society, and they were supported with economic projects. They provided funding to implement economic projects where these people could manage business or different economic productions in order to survive and have an alternative way of living beyond the war. And to them, together with those reintegration programs, they were granted with amnesty for their crimes. And there is a very interesting process ongoing, which is the process affecting victims and justice. And it's a process of providing with transitional justice. It's a framework called Comprehensive System of Truth, Justice, Reparation, and Non-Repetition. And it includes 5 areas. It includes a Truth Commission. It includes also a special unit for the search of missing people. There are more than 20,000 people disappear in Colombia due to the actions of the warring parties. And they also created a special jurisdiction for peace, kind of different mechanisms, legal mechanisms to provide amnesty for some political crimes in exchange of truth. And also this system include reparation measures for peace building for the victims, and also try to include guarantees of non-repetitions through the strengthening of human rights promotion. So as I told you, it was difficult to implement the agreement. It has been difficult, and it's still difficult, the implementation, because the political landscape in Colombia is not in favor of this agreement anymore. But the international community and a lot of Colombians believe that this is the way to open a door out of the war in Colombia. And we can see how many international agencies and international organizations are providing lots of aid in order to implement the peace agreement. Of course, this peace agreement follows the liberal peace building approach, which has been quite unsuccessful in Palestine and in other regions. But it is true that in Colombia, they are trying to bring into the solution a transformation of relations in the country, and they are trying to offer an exit for the warring parties through the transitional justice. So this is a very interesting process happening in Colombia. Yeah, the state has been trying to implement the agreement, following both up-bottom and bottom-up approaches, and taking in particular considerations the need to differentiate the territory in Colombia, and to pay attention to the periphery of the Colombian territory and those places where the state has less presence. So they have tried to attend that. And also civil society is very much active in the implementation of the peace agreement. Not only human rights defenders, leaders and so on, but also the churches in Colombia. They are having a very relevant space to participate in the implementation of the peace agreement, but also the organization of victims. Still, reconciliation is far away, because we know that conflict transformation is a long-term process. And don't forget that the war is ongoing. We have paramilitary groups and guerrilla groups and the state security forces still warring in Colombia. And yes, it is a process which it is in construction. I mean, the reconciliation, but it still have a lot of changes. So one of the changes is providing justice for victims. Yeah, they are trying to get it through this transitional justice mechanism, and well, it is getting some results. There is also, or it is also relevant, the contributions of the Truth Commission of the National Center for Historical Memory, in order to create or to establish a truth, and to create a memory, a common memory of the events happening during the armed conflicts and the period of violence in Colombia. There are many efforts also to provide reparations, in some cases material reparations by the state or by the other armed actors in the conflict, but also symbolic reparations, not only material, but also symbolic. And this is contributing to help or to heal some of the wounds of the war. Yeah, the land access and the distribution of land is an issue still not finished and very controversial. And this is going to be very much significant to end part of the structures that provide violence to the Colombians. And yes, we have a positive peace, which is still not real in Colombia. We are attending to the construction of a peace who could be long-lasting, but it will last only if Colombia and the Colombians are able to create a state where yeah, everybody in Colombia has a place inside. So we are talking about to building inclusive societies, and also there is a need to extend culture of peace in Colombia. There is a need to try to transform the culture of violence, because in Colombia many people are used to solve conflicts through violence, because this is what they are watching and experiments all their life. And yeah, there is a need for a strong effort in trying to change those mindsets and trying to extend this culture of peace in Colombia in order to bring reconciliation for the people living in this society. And sorry very much for my short my long talk, but for addressing in a short way many different issues. And I'm here ready for your questions and comments if you have.
Thank you very much, Professor Diego, for this enlightenment about Colombia. We will open session for discussion, and if people would like, just raise up your hands and then we can answer questions. So I will give you first to answer questions. If you want, I also have a question, but I will maybe let Zinat first. As Zinat, you can ask your question.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ayad. Thank you for this presentation. So my question is revolving around the role of the external intervention, if any, because your presentation is focusing on the domestic situation. So what about the international countries or international role in the conflict, either in the conflict or in the reconciliation and justice, transitional justice process?
Nora, thank you for your question. And I mean, there is a strong interest in the international community for trying to accompany the implementation and supporting the implementation of the last peace agreement in Colombia, because in general terms, the agreement ended with the war between the state and one of the main actors in armed actors in Colombia. And the international community tried to take this process and the situation in Colombia as a successful example, and an example to apply in other places. No, the way that the negotiations were developed and the way that they are building peace in Colombia and reconciliation. So we have a lot of international bodies acting here. We have the interest of the United States and the European Union happening not only now. They were paying attention to Colombia and spending a lot of money in Colombia since the 90s, and now even more. And they are trying to implement this model of building a liberal peace in Colombia. And there is definitely a significant effort by themselves, but also many other countries are trying to support this process through aid, through political support, in different ways, but also the civil society, all the Latin American groups of solidarity are trying to contribute to this. So the international civil society is trying to support the local civil society in order to implement the agreement, because what is written in the agreement, it is something good for the country and for the Colombians. It is a change, and a structural change in the state, in terms of the economy, in terms of the political arena, in terms of bringing into the system people who were excluded before. So it is a good a good starting point to end violences in Colombia. And so the problems comes with the implementation. So the international community, governmental or non-governmental, they are trying to to facilitate the implementation, even when the government in Colombia sometimes don't want to do it. The new government, they believe that the only way to bring peace to Colombia is through war. So the only way to bring peace to Colombia is defeating militarily the guerrillas or the paramilitary groups. The only way to build peace in Colombia is through order and security and this kind of thinking. So the government is not very happy with some of the agreements in the final deal, but the international community is putting pressure on them to fulfill the accords. So we will see what happens, but yeah, it is not going bad so far now. But of course, reconciliation is still far away. So, you have any other question?
Nora, you can ask your question, Nora.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor, for your presentation of a very complicated issue. I'm interested in the role of the ally and building a community of allyship in reconciliation processes. And I wonder, you didn't mention this in your presentation, but I wonder if you have any examples in the Colombian example where there was allyship in between the warring parties, whether there were state actors who served as allies to the farmers, for instance, or even whether the international community and third-party states acted as allies in a way that was beneficial to getting to a peace agreement or in any part of the reconciliation process.
Yes, during the whole negotiations, there were external parties trying to support the negotiations, the conversations between the state and the FARC. So we could see how regional organizations like the Organization for American States, it was taking part into the mediation process. Of course, United Nations were facilitating also the process. Also, some countries, they called them groups of friends. And there were countries like Uruguay, Chile, Venezuela, who were accompanying the process. Mostly they were providing trust. So they were guarantees of trust between the government in Colombia and the FARC leaders. Also, the United States and the European Union were involved in the support. So, yeah, both actors, the government and the FARC, they receive the support or the pressure, sometimes support, sometimes pressure from a group of external parties. Countries, regional organizations, and international organizations. And also in the agreement, it was included the idea that this group of friends, these countries and organizations who were supporting the peace process, they were going to keep supporting the peace process, not until the signature of the deal, but also after, during the implementation. So, for instance, the European Union has to be in charge of the parts of the development, economic and development issues in Colombia through aid. The United States was in charge of the reform of the security sector, and some countries and some regional organizations have different tasks during the process of the implementation. And this was negotiated at the same time that the rest of issues in the process.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to ask a question in this regard of Colombia? I would like to ask also a question, if nobody's asking. When Colombia did reconciliation and they tried and it failed, and when do you think it really became a failure on the reconciliation process in Colombia? And what is the main, if there's a main thing that happened that you distinguish that the failure of reconciliation? And at that point, if you can explain for us.
Yeah, historically, we have seen how in the 80s there were some peace processes in Colombia, and the state didn't respect the agreement reached. So, for instance, in the 80s there was an agreement between the government and the FARC, and the agreement involved the political participation of the FARC in the elections, in the political system, and the FARC were going to demobilize. However, they suffered the attack over the political party that they created. So it was a kind of political genocide. So the FARC didn't trust in the state, because the state should have provided protection. They were civilians. They were people who needed the protection of the state, and the state failed to protect them. So in that moment, the FARC renounced to keep ongoing that process, and also they didn't trust until 30 years later in a new government to engage in peace negotiations and in a process of reconciliation. So this happened in the 80s with the FARC, but it also happened in the 90s. In the 90s, there was another peace agreement with several guerrillas, and they got the change in the constitution, so they got the reform of the state. But later, the same political elites who were controlling the government, they didn't allow the new parties and the new people to perform politically, and also they stopped and they prevented the reform of the state. So this made very difficult to get trust between the state and the guerrillas. And beyond that, we see also how the victims of the violence, irrespective of the different armed actors who could make the crimes or the massacres or the violence, we see how the victims, they don't trust still in the justice that the state is providing to them, or is offering to them. So yeah, there are too many actors involved in the conflicts. It is a too long history of violence in Colombia, and this needs also a long period of building trust, building new relations in order to transform the conflict and start the real reconciliation.
Okay, so just a moment. Reconciliation is starting in Colombia after the agreement. This is
I guess no before, yeah.
No before. Because here in Yena we are working on reconciliation in the middle of the conflict. This is what we are researching. So what do you think?
I don't see it in Colombia. I don't see it. Because there were efforts, but the ongoing violence always destroy the initiatives and the first efforts. So there was an agreement in 2006 in order to demobilize part of the paramilitary groups and part of the guerrilla groups, and they also started a process of transitional justice. But in the middle of the war, with the same actors performing violence, massacres, and so on, it didn't provide a real reconciliation for anybody.
Okay.
So yeah, I think at least in Colombia, it was necessary that the main or one of the main actors stop and demobilize and to stop war against the state in order to to facilitate the beginning of the reconciliation process.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Diego. So we have another 3 questions, and you like take them, Professor? Is okay? Okay. So okay, I'll give Zinat. You can ask another question. That's fine. So because she's in turn, I guess her turn.
I would like to know about the impact of culture and religious values on the peace process in Colombia. And is the reconciliation process political only, or is there a role for religions as well?
In Colombia, part of the churches, the Christian churches, and part of the Catholic Church, they had a lot of efforts in order to prevent violence and to bring reconciliation in the Colombian society. But they were not doing it in a religious way. So they were not looking for a reconciliation after the idea of the Christian pardon or this kind of things. They were looking for a political reconciliation because they knew that, and also the Christian churches in Colombia, their role goes beyond the religious issues. They are respected institutions. They are institutions considered non-party institutions. So different actors have a respect for them and trust on them. So yeah, they could, and they are playing a mediation role. They are also working a lot for the victims. So yeah, they are respected, but the legitimacy that they have, it doesn't come from a religious approach. It's more political.
Thank you. We'll take Professor Mkhimar Abu Saada. He's from Al-Azhar University in Gaza. Welcome, Professor. You can ask a question.
Thank you, Dr. Riyad. I want to thank and salute Professor Diego for a very informative discussion. It was a very interesting discussion to hear about Latin American and especially Colombian experience with internal conflict and also with internal reconciliation. My question to Professor Diego is that I would like to know more. What was the role of regional countries or outside countries, to be more specific, in the internal conflict in Colombia? We very much know that within Colombia there was a fight between the government and leftist groups. There was also a fight between the government and guerrillas, or as they are called, cartels, those who were engaged in drugs. So what was the role of outside actors? And I would like also to know what was the role of those outside actors in reconciliation, in internal reconciliation within Colombia. And thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Yeah, in both cases, during the war and during the peace process, and now in the reconciliation process, external actors played a fundamental roles here. Government was supported mostly by the US because they share a common vision of how to deal with conflicts through security and militarism, but also because the governments in Colombia, which were quite conservative, also had a common vision on how to deal with the left movements, left parties during the Cold War, but also after that, for the US, it was a matter of the war on drugs. So the government of Colombia presented the the idea of fighting the guerrillas as a way to deal with narcos, and like if the guerrillas were the only responsible for drugs trafficking in Colombia, what it is not true. But the US was supporting with economic and military aid to the Colombia, and also providing them with some intelligence and this kind of thing. Some others conservative governments in the region, at some point Brazil, and in other cases Chile, they supported the Colombian government too. And the guerrillas received support by governments in countries where left parties had a role there. So for instance, Ecuador or Venezuela, Ecuador supported or at least host and provide them with some resources to some of the Colombian guerrillas, especially to the National Liberation Army and to the FARC too. So yeah, they offer safe havens for them during some times, and in others they provide them with resources. But after that, during the last peace negotiations, they were really active, also trying to mediate between the Colombian government and the leadership of these guerrillas, because the leadership of these guerrillas, the FARC, they trusted maybe in the governments of Ecuador and Venezuela. So these governments were able to talk with the leaders of the guerrilla, but also with the Colombian government, and to bring them together and to bring positions or agreements. So yeah, before and after, and they are going to be very relevant also in the future. And let me answer one of the questions that is here in the chat, because someone asked or mentioned, the idea of long-term conflicts are complex to resolve. What is the real reason, in your opinion, for the success of reconciliation? For me, the biggest factor, the most relevant factor in order to bring reconciliation is offer a future for everybody. So you need to create a situation where everybody, all the parts in the conflict, all the members of the society could feel comfortable in a near future, in terms of how is the political distribution, how are the political opportunities. So it's the idea of bringing inclusive societies for everybody. If you are able to offer that to the society, you have more possibilities to get success with this scenario of in this scenario of reconciliation.
Thank you, Professor. Who wants? Also, we have Professor Nizam from Checa from Al Istiqlal University. Maybe he would like also to ask question. Professor Nizam, you can ask.
Thank you, Professor Iyad, and Professor Diego as well for his analytical presentation here about Colombia. I have a concern about the relationship between Colombian economy and conflict and reconciliation as well, because Colombian economy is regarded as a war economy for a long time. And if we notice that the new liberal system in a democratic state, how can this kind of economy function in regard of war? I mean, using war in order to, and illegal economic, in order to advance their economic interests. So do you think that political system and economic system in Colombia can advance reconciliation upon democratic basis at the expense of their economic interests? Thank you.
Well, it's not going to be easy, and it's probably one of the main challenge that this reconciliation process has, because those who are in power of the wealth, in many cases, they don't want to share it. But they have to understand that if they want to enjoy a situation of peace, and they should share part of the wealth that they have, because otherwise there are too many people unhappy with that situation, and it's not going to be possible to stop violence and even if they just lock themselves behind walls and these things, this is not going to stop the violence even against them. And I don't agree with the idea of Colombia as a war economy. Is this true that there are some actors who benefit from the war economy, but it is not the main problem there? Because, for instance, for the FARC, many of the people who have been demobilized, there was a reintegration program providing them with economic opportunities. So it is feasible. It is feasible to convince and to transform the guerrillas or the paramilitary groups in the civilians and provide them with businesses or economic means to survive. This is possible. It's not easy, but it is happening already with the FARC, the FARC members who were demobilized. So it could be improved. The main problem is how there are many people who benefit from war, because war provides them the excuse to expel, for instance, people from their lands and to take them. And then those lands are not going to circulate, or is not the economy, the agricultural production that happened there is not going to feed the war. It's going to be channeled through the global economic markets without any problems. I'm thinking, for instance, in those people who were they were indigenous people or rural communities who were expelled by paramilitary groups from their lands. These paramilitary groups accused them to be supporters of the guerrilla, but there was behind them international or even national corporations which wanted to take those lands to produce banana or to produce olive palm palm oil. And this production was going to be sold to the United States, was going to be sold to Europe. And behind those corporations are elites, economic elites with a lot of power that use the war as an excuse to reach their, or to expand their economic power, and so on. So, and in other cases, in Colombia, the state is trying to defend the interest of the economic elites, criminalizing those who oppose projects like mega projects, dams, or mining projects, or this kind of things with a lot of environmental impact on communities that they are not going to benefit from these projects. But they are labeled as a criminal because they are opposing the progress. They are so it is more, for me, it's more worrying, this kind of problems, and these are going to create more difficulties for the reconciliation process than the incorporation of the different militants in the guerrillas or in paramilitary groups into civilian life.
Thank you very much, Professor. We have like two questions. One is on the chat, which is a big one, I guess, from our PhD student, Wael Dukhan. He's also part of Gaza Al-Azhar University as well. And this is, if you want, I can read this question. If the quest of control of resources and power of cause of conflict, the question is there were attempts to reconcile on the basis of fair sharing political power and resources for the benefit of parties to the conflict. So I think it's the same question.
Well, I don't see the question. I see it as a statement, and I agree
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah, it's a statement. Yes.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's the idea is a power sharing. I mean, reconciliation, and this part of the implementation of the peace process in Colombia is a power sharing process, and it is, of course, this is in terms of not only political power sharing, but also economic power sharing and resources power sharing in benefits of all society.
But they accepted to share power. Did they accept to share power? I don't think so. No, that's a question.
The previous government, the government of Santos who signed the agreement, they accepted. The new government is more reluctant to that. But it is understood, at least now, that in the elites of Colombia, there is a debate between two positions. One, those who doesn't want to change anything, and they are trying to avoid any power sharing, and those elites that understand that if they want to keep enjoying this wealth and they want a normal life in Colombia, they need to make some concessions and they need to share part of the power. And this is a division that is happening now in Colombia, and it's quite interesting because it could benefit the reconciliation process.
So they need to share to have reconciliation process, and they need to share the power.
Yeah, half of those elites understand that this is the way to do it.
Okay. Thank you very much. We have Bashar, if you like to take Bashar, and Tinat as well, if you like as well. Bashar, you can ask.
Thank you, Dr. Ayad. Dr. Diego, I want to ask you about something. You were talking about a very long, how to say, it's 50 years of violence and 50 years of, more than 50 years of conflict. So there is a successive generations involved in this conflict. They burn to find themselves involved in this violence. So they are passing their traumas and from generation to other, and also they passing the how to say dehumanization. Also, they don't acknowledge the needs and the humanity of the other parties. So I want to know more from you about how do they work on this issue, and what is the perfect time in the reconciliation process to work on healing this memory?
I agree with you, and this is happening in Colombia. But don't forget that the humans are wonderful beings, because in spite of the suffering that many of them are experimenting, I'm thinking here, for instance, in the Palestinians. If you ask to most of the Palestinians, are going to tell you that Israelis are humans, and they don't want revenge. So they are influenced by the traumas, but they are still able to recognize in the others as human beings, even when they have experimented all that the Palestinians have experimented. So in Colombia, it happens the same. A lot of people have suffered violence. They have lived in this context of continuous violence. They have traumas. They have seen massacres. Some of them are really affected psychologically and in their behavior and these kind of things. But many others, they are resilient, and I don't know how, but a lot of people is resilient in face of facing this kind of violence. So it is a big issue, and this is one of the reasons, because I told you that the idea of building a culture of peace is so relevant here, in order to deconstruct the relations, the way to solve conflicts or to deal with conflicts beyond the use of force, beyond the violence. We have to create new standards in Colombia that ban the use of violence in many contexts, that make unimaginable for people to use violence to solve different kinds of conflicts. Meanwhile, I think that it is quite important to provide justice for victims. And the way, and I think this is quite a good option in Colombia, it's a good option. The way to provide justice through transitional mechanisms, so through transitional justice, is a good way to do it, because many victims in Colombia are being attended, their claims are being considered, they are receiving symbolic retributions, and they are seeing that the process is advancing. There is not only impunity in this peace process, and in that way the victims are engaged in the process. And I think this is very, very relevant, and it's a way to heal the old wounds of the conflicts through truth and with justice. So justice sometimes is a very difficult issue in peace processes, because of course many of the perpetrators don't want to be responsible for the actions that they did. So they are quite reluctant to sign the peace agreements if they are going to be prosecuted after that. But with these transitional mechanisms, at least there are some justice advancing in the case of Colombia, for instance. And yeah, I think justice and truth and recognition is help to heal the wounds of many of the victims in the Colombian conflicts, for instance. But still, there is a lot of need of support dealing with collective trauma, and yeah, in small organizations who have suffered violent attacks or that, or communities, they have developed their own mechanism to overcome the fear and the trauma. And you see how in many places there are different units or even local processes in order to deal with this. So from the grassroots, there are things happening, but yeah, it's not easy, and it is not done in all the territory and in all the people affected.
Thank you very much. Professor Dr. Ahmed Robbo says that he asked a question he didn't answer, the most important factor of long-term reconciliation. Well,
I told him that in my case, I was thinking in offering a future for everybody in the next scenario. So everybody in the society should be able to recognize a place for themselves or feel comfortable in the future created after a peace agreement. So if they don't imagine themselves inside this new society, inside this new state, they are not going to be very happy with the reconciliation process. So they are going to feel excluded from that, and they are not going to make any effort in the reconciliation process.
So it's common future.
Yeah, a common vision.
A common vision for the future for both. I think that's a very important aspect for reconciliation, even not just for Colombia, for any kind of reconciliation. Yeah. People can develop, the conflict develops more conflict or complementary elements of the conflict. And if we can develop a vision for a future, what is the vision of future for reconciliation process? I think this is the vision to try not to end the conflict, but to transform the conflict actually.
Yeah.
So this is I think a common future. I think is very important, and a common history, developing a new common history, right? Does that happen?
Yes, it is happening. This is what we call the truth. So it's creating and it's creating a common narrative on that, an historical narrative, common, accepted by everybody, or at least by some institutions, respected by everybody. So it's the work of the Through Commission of the Center for the Historical Memory to try to reach agreements on the past, what happened.
Very interesting, because Ricoeur said how to deal with the past, create a new past, but people don't understand how you can create a new past. It's just history. We write a common vision, a new history together. And people, they thought that he was want to erase the past, but he does not want to erase the past, like create a new past, new history. So, and that's exactly what Ricoeur actually said, like what you have said right now, actually. It makes me remind me of his saying, creating a new past. Zinat has another question, if you like. I think we can, do you like to give her a question for Zinat?
Yes, I'm going to answer this, but I have to go after that. And you have a lecture too, so.
Yeah. It's okay. It's not a lecture after that. We are in another program, and there's the same program, but another like only the professors.
Fine.
And we are developing a master program for each university in reconciliation and peace studies. So it's another. It's part of the program.
Okay.
Outside the PhD program. For Erasmus Plus, another thing. But you are also welcome to join us if you like. It's up to you, Professor, as always. We love you, and we're very happy that you are here and you give us a vision of how Colombia it is. So Zinat, if you can very quickly before Professor leaves.
So as long as the scene is so complex, there are a lot of beneficiaries. So is there any collusion between the elite, such as businessmen, intellectuals, clerks, and others, with the political class? Are there any mutual interest between them?
I can hear you well. Can you repeat the question, please?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, there are like a interfering. Try again.
Yeah. So I say, as long as the scene is so complex, then there are a lot of beneficiaries. So is there any collusion between the elite, such as businessmen, intellectuals, and clerks, others, with the political class? Are there any mutual interests between them?
Not really. There is not a common ground for all of them. The closer that we are from that common ground is the current peace agreement. Behind that agreement, many people are not happy, but at least they think that this is the minimum that they can reach. So, well, it is better than nothing. There are still some people who reject it in the left stream of the political spectrum, and there is still in the political elites, half of them is still they don't want to share anything, so they are against this agreement too. So yeah, probably if this agreement is successful, is implemented, and it provide more peace and more benefits for more people, I guess that it will receive more support, and more people will see the benefits of it and will defend it, or want it to extend it even, or go deeper in some of the details of the proposals. But I think we are still far from that situation in Colombia.
Thank you very much, Professor Diego, for this.
You're welcome.
I call it Colombia Day, Colombia workshop. Actually, it was excellent to have you and to inspire us of what really is happening in Colombia. As a Palestinian or coming from Middle East and North Africa, it's inspiring to compare between Colombians' reconciliation and failures and the structure of violence, how it has its types of political, economical, and state structure. I think it's very enlightening to all of us that what you gave us today, and I think it is very excellent to have you, of course, always. We would want you more. Professor Diego is from University of Granada and working with us on the Global South as well project that we are trying to develop again with other universities as well. So we thank you, Professor Diego, for this very strong lecture that you gave us here today. Astonishing. Thank you.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. So now after this, we can take a break for 10 minutes, I guess, and then only professors can stay because this is a on stations for professors and for developing the master programs. Thank you, dear. You can stay there, Professor Diego, if you like, and see what we are doing. Nearly the same what we want to do in Global South.
No, I still have to work here in Granada. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Have a good one.
Professor Diego, before you go, if you can hear me, Professor Diego, I'm Laura. I'm the director of practice for Armina. Please hug Jose Antonio Naranjo for me. Please hug him for me, and also Fanny. I wasn't able to meet you when I visited out there, but you have a great studies program out there. So please, un abrazo súper fuerte para Antonio, que nos recibió con todo el amor del mundo. Gracias.
Okay.
Thank you. Dr. Laura is our director of practice for the Armina. Yeah, and she's helping us in the work. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So we'll meet. Bye-bye. Bye. Have a good one. Cheers. So meet after like at 8 minutes, we can drink coffee and then we can continue with the Al-Azhar University work. Thank you everyone who was here actually for this session. So meet after 10 minutes.
Great.